Now, Professor Angus Dalgleish joins us. He's an oncologist, an infectious disease expert and a professor at St George's Hospital Medical School. Professor Dalgleish, we're delighted that you're joining us here on GB News today. What's your view of the Prime Minister's strategy to postpone some medical appointments across the NHS to focus instead on COVID booster jabs?
Well, first of all, I must say I've followed this very, very closely, and I tend to take far more weight from Dr. Curtis, the South African head of the Medical Association there, who's assured us, gave a very long chat yesterday, that it is very mild compared to anything else. And I think that is very, very important, because that's what we expect as viruses go round in waves. They get more infectious and they get less lethal. So why would you want to close down the health service yet again for something that is more infectious? Now, I look at it the other way. I think that it's so infectious, I don't think you can do anything about it. Just let us look at the figures on lockdown, as they again were discussed this weekend, very, very solid figures. Who had the worst lockdown in Europe? It was actually Belgium. Who had the least? It was Sweden. And what was the difference? Who had the worst death rate? It was Belgium. Who had the worst trouble across everything? It was Belgium. People say, oh, that's a European thing and Sweden's different. No, compare California and Florida. Virtually identical climates, everything. Florida, no lockdown. California, massive lockdown and restrictions. Who has the worst death rate? California. So I think we need to learn that doing all these things, trying to prevent spread, is, especially when they go up a gear and get more infectious, I believe it's a complete and utter waste of time. And that as soon as the virus goes through the population, it's probably the quicker the better. And in many ways, it could be an infectious vaccine, as it were. So with the death rate being much smaller, and yes, we hear that there's somebody in hospital with the vaccine, with the variant. If they hadn't been in hospital with the variant, I'd be very surprised, because it's terribly infectious. It's going through like wildfire, and people go to hospital and die, and they often go with the COVID, but they don't die of COVID because they're dying of other things, like the tragic case that we heard of someone having to go to hospital with severe abdominal pain. If they go into hospital, that is the problem, and they pick up COVID, they get classified as COVID. So I think a lot of the figures that we hear about people dying of COVID in hospital is exaggerated. And as an oncologist, I am really, really concerned about people being put off. I know so many cases where the disease has gone from early, potentially curable, to being lethal or presenting stage 4 disease, where it is a really big problem with a high chance of dying. So many people. I mean, the figure in calculation, one of the figures was 750,000 people will be affected over the next year or two. You cannot keep locking down an economy on and basically that is what they're doing. Just actually say we're going to have these boosters. And that brings me back to another thing, is that if you keep giving these boosters for this variant, which has escaped the last one, then the next variant will jump in because it will escape the other antibodies. And it underpins what I said right at the beginning of the pandemic. You do not go for antibodies in order to treat respiratory viral disease. It is the T-cell response. I propose a T-cell vaccine which would boost everything, and it doesn't matter when you have good T-cell responses what variant it is. It doesn't matter whether it's COVID or flu. And it's a very relatively easy thing to do, but it has been ignored. And I'm very, very concerned about that. And that is the action that I'd be taking. Instead of getting these more boosters, which are only going to last 3 months maximum, probably less,
Angus,
then you're going to need another booster. So you'll have the NHS shut down forever. No, I really think now's the time to be really...
Professor, may I come in? Just because we haven't got too much time. I just want to put, just for reasons of balance, put what the Prime Minister has said this morning, get your interpretation of it. I know you take a different view, but I quote from the Prime Minister, "I think the idea that this is somehow a mild version of the virus, I think that's something we need to set on one side and just recognise the sheer pace at which it accelerates through the population." So he says it's not milder.
Basically, he's being advised by the usual harbingers of doom that you've got to plan for the worst case scenario.
Science officers.
Well, I mean, if we plan for the worst case scenario, we're just going to have to lock down everything and never emerge again. So I totally and utterly disagree. And I repeat what I'm saying. And I would say, why aren't we looking at more, proper advice for people? That one of the reasons people get these virus diseases at this time of the winter, and they do sweep through all sorts, is because they're low in vitamin D. They've done nothing about that, in spite of all the publicity. All right, for people who are very vulnerable, they decided they'd probably give them a small tablet, a dose which is far too low to be of any use at all. And this was due to very bad advice from the Scientific Advisory Committee on Nutrition. So I really do think they should be concentrating more on these things than trying to get everybody boosted and see the rest of the NHS collapse.
Professor Angus Dalgleish, an oncologist, an infectious disease expert and professor at St George's Hospital Medical School. Thanks a lot for joining us on GB News.